Yo, all right, hey guys. Gonna do something a little different today. Um, I just finished recording with my friend JB for the show, and we did a book review on a book called Range, and it got me in the mood to do a book review. But actually, I've been wanting to do a book review for a while now, and I have a few books that I want to review, but I had actually written a script for this one. Now, in the future, I'll just read the script and not do the intro. But I guess this was just kind of my way of saying that I'll be trying to do more scripted videos from now on, just because I feel like that helps with the flow and kind of helps me put my thoughts together mo more coherently. Free flow is really good and it's really cool, but sometimes I'll get to the end and I'll be like, oh damn, like I thought I was gonna say that, but I didn't get to it. So this will kind of give me a better chance to lay my ideas out more coherently and yeah. But I actually didn't do the script for the whole. I didn't finish the script, so I'll go into like a free flow for the second half. But all right, let's get right into it. Overworked, underpaid, and unfulfilled. I think that sometimes it's easy to lose sight of just how much of a toll work takes on all of us in the 21st century. If you hate your job or simply hate working in general, there's a word that our society has for you: lazy. Our society values industriousness, productivity, and optimization. If you have none of these traits, then surely you must be lazy. At least, that's the conventional narrative. Laziness does not exist as an alternative narrative to the widespread notion of laziness, challenging our previously unchallenged views of how we conceptualize our views of those ways of being that we instinctively regard as lazy. Overall, I think this is a decent book. For this review, I'd like to start with what I liked about it, followed by areas where I disagree or would like to have seen more, followed by my own suggestions for improvement, and then ending with my final two ratings. The first being for the book overall, and the second being for how good of a job the book does in arguing its main point to the reader. To that end, let's begin identifying the thesis for this book. Laziness does not exist. So, um, if I had to give a thesis for the book, it would basically be that the conception of laziness is and must be situated within the context of um, cultural values stemming from, you know, the beginning of the industrial era in the 19th century, and specifically from, the ethical cultural values of um, Protestant Protestantism. I'm really forgetting a lot of what I was trying to say here, but if you've taken a class in sociology or something, you know what I'm talking about. Max Weber, the Protestant ethic. There you go. That's what I was trying to get to. But I forgot. Yeah, so I think that it's a very compelling case. Um, you could say that all values are, you know, culture bound and derived from culture, but I would argue that that's kind of the point, and that the values that we overlook the most are the ones that are the most prevalent in our culture because we just assume them to be true. Um, in this case, the notion of laziness. Um, and I should have the author up. I wish I had their name right now, but um, I think the author of this book does a very good job of pointing that out and of gaining our attention insofar as we are willing to be critical of any idea, really, but specifically here, laziness. And it's almost mundane. It almost sounds banal to say, that laziness is or how we think about laziness is culture bound and it's a cultural um, ideology, but it is true nonetheless. Um, and so, yeah, I think that was the first two chapters of the book. Um, but after that, I really like that. I thought that was uh, probably the strongest point in the book, and the part that I liked the most. I'm all for challenging cultural ethical values, and she did so, but I believe it's a she, um, in a very intelligent way with pretty good historical context as well. So I applaud them for that. Um, Now we'll get into some of my disagreements. So um, the first would be kind of the direction that the book takes immediately after, establishing this idea that, well, for us to call people lazy comes from is born from a society um, which especially values productivity, optimization, specifically for the purpose of increasing profit for companies and corporations. It's situated within that context. Um, I again, I found that piece very important, very insightful, and really, that's why I read the book in the first place, is because I felt very much that the book would be going in this direction of being a strong social and cultural critique of late stage capitalism, of and more specifically and more broadly of the neoliberal paradigm of consumerism in general. Not which not only includes capitalism, but as reflected in China's economy and now in the world economy and in communism as well. Um, Communism is not, I would argue, is not rid of um, the same tendencies towards hyper consumerism and exploitation of the natural environment any more than capitalism is. Um, the big problem for me is consumerism and commodification. Um, but I really appreciated that point that she made, um, or that they made. Um, where I thought the book started to fall off was after that point. Um, to me, it very much felt like this is a book. While it tried to break with these values you know, of pushing against this, you know, hyper productive, hyper optimized, hyper consumerist, cultural ideological framework, um, there's several points in the book where the author basically makes the argument if we can lean more into what we as a society call laziness, which we've already established is, a culture-bound way of looking at the behavior or the feeling of not wanting to work. Um, if we lean into this, it will be better for our mental health, which is good. I agree with that. I very much agree with that. And I think that's a very important point. And that therefore, and this is the leap that I almost wish she didn't make, uh, that we can be more productive if we learn to be lazy skillfully, because it will allow us to, there's research that suggests that you can actually get more work done. You can actually be more creative, et cetera, et cetera. Um, to me, this is just a recreation of the problem. Um, if we're saying that, um, we need to dispense with this notion of productivity and that this obsession with productivity is causing us to become depressed and anxious, etc., more unhappy as a society in general, um, then I fail to see why she puts so much emphasis into how can you be more productive at your job? How can you work with your boss to, figure out how you can optimize your mental health in a way that lets you get more done at work. Um, because, and I know that the author would agree with me on this is all situated within the context of global climate change and global pollution. Um, in other words, to cut long matters short, is it not possible that the jobs that we're going to are actively contributing to our own demise and the demise of the natural world because it's a framework itself that is predicated upon the exploitation, one, of human labor, and two, again, of nature. Um, and so if, the ultimate goal, at least from her book with these later chapters is, well, oh, but you can still be productive. You can still um, optimize and all that. I would say that's that's not the real problem. The problem is that we're destroying the earth in the process. And the reason that I say I know this author would agree with me on this is because they do. Um, I think it was one chapter, it might have been several, but make the point that they're a huge political activist, no surprise there, and that this political activism, in addition to your day job, can leave you utterly drained emotionally. And and they did write explicitly about the stress of environmental catastrophe, of climate change, etc., and the need for political activism in this domain, um, which I very much agree with, to which I would say also, then why should we, isn't it counterintuitive to focus on maximizing productivity, maximizing our mental health, how we feel, how we show up to our days, um, for the benefit of productivity at our jobs, if that productivity at our jobs is directly contributing to all of these myriad of, one, environmental, but two, I would argue, social problems as well. Um, how can we argue that and then also argue um, that, you know, but we still need to be productive at our jobs. This is how you can do it. Um, yeah, and I think I think the author is kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too, in a sense that um, it's one, trying to reject this notion of laziness, reject this obsession with productivity and optimizing your life and whatever. But it's also this, oh, but we need to, you can still be more productive at work. You can still, in other words, all of the things that I would have thought are intrinsically valuable in and of themselves, having better mental well-being, I'll just use that one as the main example. Um, it seems, at least how it's portrayed and at least how I interpreted it in the book, that mental health, like, yeah, it's important, blah, blah, blah. But, ultimately, like, oh, yeah, but it's to the end of being more productive. It's to the end of being, you know, uh, I don't know, having the perfect life work balance. Well, maybe even if you had the perfect life work balance, you'd still be contributing to the exploitation of natural resources and if not human labor anymore, still like pollution, climate change, etc. Um, that stuff is not tangential to the human story. That's the reality right now. Um, and again, I just want to be very clear with what I'm saying. I'm not in any way implying that the author doesn't, one, believe climate change is real, or two, understand how severe it is. They write explicitly about, and actually, I'll give them credit there. They give um, what I find to be very good advice, specifically for dealing with climate change anxiety, and that actually was very helpful for me personally. But still, I feel like there is very much this appeal to the corporate class of almost, I could see, I don't know, like a CFO reading this and be like, oh, okay, so this is how I can optimize my staff, and this is how I can. And look, I'm not saying that because it basically comes down to a matter of working within the system or working outside of the system. And clearly there is an element of working within the system. And I don't hold that against them. I really don't. Um, but I would like to have seen more looking at it from a very, um, yeah, I mean, putting it in the context of, um, I think in a way that us showing up to our 9 to 5s is like contributing to the problem because us showing up to our 9 to 5s, working on the 2025 M&M summer campaign for whatever. I don't know if that makes sense actually, because chocolate kind of melts if it gets hot in the summer. But anyway, that us showing up to our jobs like that, that it actually does directly contribute to all of these, especially environmental problems, but also um, social problems. Um, now, I understand that we have to eat and put a roof over our head. I 100% get that. Um, and I truly don't hold it over this author's head that they decided to go this route, at least insofar as they did, um, by working within the system. Maybe what I'm trying to say, if anything, is that I just honestly think that the situation is so much more dire, um, that, you know, that I think it really does have to come down to us being willing to raise hell to see the social change, the environmental change, um, and I would say the shift in human consciousness that we need to rectify all of the problems that we see in our world today. Um, so there's that. And I guess that's the first disagreement. The second one, and I guess I kind of already touched on this. I feel like the book is too far-reaching and too broad, and this is actually kind of timely because I just finished a book review on a book called Range, which says that we should have a range of knowledge and a range of experiences that we draw from in our understanding of the world. Again, his book is also very kind of, I would say, very corporate friendly, which is fine. I'm not holding that over his head either. He deserves to make a living, and he put a lot of research into that book for sure. Um, but it does not very much uh well, I already did my review of that book. But my friend JB actually asked a very good question, which is, just I guess I'm answering it now, is can you have too much range? And in this case, I would say yes. And in this case, I would say that that this is something that this book suffers from specifically. Laziness does not exist um, with respect to all of the social issues that it tries to address in this book. Um, I think the most relevant social issue with respect to this idea of laziness and work and all that obviously is the, growing economic disparity, which is at an all-time high. It's almost inconceivable, I think, um, how much of a wealth gap there is between the ultra wealthy and literally everyone else. Um, so that would be a very relevant one, and they do touch on that. They do touch um, on that social issue, but then there's also um, gender and environmental. Um, Again, and I said this was, relevant, so I won't fault them for that one, but um, I think like gun ownership at one point, maybe not. Um, I could be mistaken there, but um, how we conceive about mental health, how we how we think about elections, how like all this stuff. I I get where the author is coming from. Um, Donald Trump is president once again. That should be evidence enough that we, need more focus on all of these social issues, and that, issues like transgenderism, immigration, that these are absolutely important topics that we um, need to focus on and need to advocate for. Um, I, I I very much agree with that. Um, but what I disagree with is that it needed to all be in this book, because it just waters down so much the central thesis, again, that I think is fair to identify, that um, there is no such thing as laziness because of, um, I was wishing that she would go into more of a philosophical, um, social analytical um, take here on, the idea of laziness as a cultural phenomenon. Um, but because it has so much breadth of, how can parents have more, I don't know, like a better sex life, I think they talk about at one point, or how can we optimize for, like, how can we correct the educational system, and again, all things that I'm totally for, and very much, think that we are in need of addressing directly. But because it has so much breadth, I think that it fails to give, one, the um the attention that the main thesis of this idea of laziness deserves, and two, it fails to give adequate attention to all of the social issues, um, that all the other social issues that the author introduces into this book. Um, yes, they're worthy of attention, and for that reason, I think that they should have been their own books, honestly. And and if that means the author can't, write as many books or write all of them at the same time, that's fine. I would have liked to have seen much more of what I saw in the first and second and third chapters for so much more of the book. I think, I mean, you really could write a whole book on um uh kind of the historical development, which again they do focus on, but not for that much of the book. Of the, I guess, philosophical underpinnings of the idea of laziness, really, really getting into it. And you could easily make a whole book out of it. And I thought that's what it was going to be, and it just wasn't. Um, so, um, I would say this: if you are wanting to read this book for the reasons um, that I think you probably that I think you probably want to read it for, I would recommend just reading the first 1 to 2 chapters. Obviously, you can read the rest of it too, but really critiquing this idea of laziness and seeing how culture bound it is, seeing the historical development of the idea, and seeing that, this is actually very much rooted in, the Protestant ethic that Max Weber is talking about, with the rise of capitalism and an industrial working class. Um, that's covered in chapters 1 and 2. Um, Beyond that, it's really not. And and so if you are interested in reading it for that reason, I would recommend that to you. It is really good um in those chapters, but after that, I just find that it gets very watered down, talking about topics that are important nonetheless, but um just kind of detracts from the book being able to focus on the problem that it sets out to identify in the first place. So, um, I'll give my two ratings now. What did I think of? So I'll start with what I think of how it did at addressing the thesis that it set out to address, or arguing the point that it wanted to make. Um, I would give it actually a 7 or 8 out of 10. Um, but I'll give a caveat there, and I'll limit that to the first two chapters. And in that case, because I'm going to limit it to the first two chapters for that rating, I'm going to give it I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Because it does do a very good job of focusing on the history, the development of the idea, um, being critical with our philosophical, interpretation of that idea. It does do a very good job of that. Um, but only in the first two chapters. Um, so going into my next rating, as a book, I would have to give it probably a 5 or a 6 out of 10, maybe 5.5. Um, just because, again, the organization for the book is very much watered down, especially, I really found the second half of the book to be very irrelevant to this conversation. Yes, we should hear, um, and I say this as someone with a social work background, so, hopefully, um, I hope it shows that I take these seriously. Like, yes, we should absolutely hear, um, queer voices in this conversation, um, insofar as we're looking at the workplace environment as a whole. How do employers treat their employees? How, is there a disparity in how, um, employers let uh, different employees take time off of work based on sex, ethnicity, whatever. Um, but I really think it was just giving, it wasn't structured well enough for it to accomplish that, um, without the main thesis suffering as a result of it. Um, and again, that could have been another book in and of itself. How are queer people, um, you know, what is their experience at their workplace life, and what needs to change, and what changes do we need to make at the level of social policy, right? That could easily be an entire book in and of itself. Um, but because the author kind of tried to squeeze it all in there, I just think it kind of, in a certain sense, failed at both. Um, so overall, I'll give it a 5.5. But that's really as high as I can go. Um, I really like the first two chapters. I would recommend them um, even if you don't plan on reading, the whole thing, just because it was very validating for me. Um, and not just in a, making me feel nice kind of way, but in a, oh, well, when I can actually track the historical development of this idea, um, then I can kind of call bullshit when, um, you know, people are saying that I or other people are lazy because of this, this, and that. Um, and I'd like to give slightly more credit, um, with the kind of all the various social issues. I think that the author does quite a good job of, does a decent job of bringing in mental health as a factor that contributes um, to what we would regard as laziness, right? The fact that someone may have just experienced a huge loss, in their life, or that they might have some chronic health issue or anything. Um, and that we don't know everyone's situation, and that, what I walked away with from that is just be kind to people because you don't know what they're going through. People don't wear every single bad thing that happens to them on their sleeve. And we shouldn't, and we don't owe that to anyone. Um, so therefore it makes sense to operate from a place of compassion and, try to be understanding. We're not always going to live up to that. If we're tired or hungry or something bad happened to us, then, we'll probably won't be as good on it on that day. But striving towards that goal, that was a big takeaway that I had. Um, so yeah, I think I'll bump it up to a 6 for that reason. I think they did a good job there. Um, Now, the medical model of mental health, obviously, I have criticisms of that. I find that it is, quite out of alignment with the values of social work in many ways. And that's, because I have a social work background, that's probably the biggest reason that I can be very critical of it, although it is important and it is necessary. Um, but again, I'm not going to fault this author for not digging into that, way too much because, I already said that I think that there was a bit too much range in this book. Um, but yeah, I think that, one of the biggest takeaways that I have from this book, which I, would like to thank the author for, is that I have walked away with far more compassion and far more understanding, um, not only of myself but of other people, as a result of reading this book. And, if nothing else, I think that that is a great reason to read, at least some of it, and see what you think. So, yeah, I think this is the first book review that I did solo. Um, Again, the first part was scripted, but I just wanted to record, honestly. I just felt like talking. So yeah, if you, liked it, please share and give a thumbs up. Um, Maybe one day I'll have the pleasure of having this author on. I'm just gonna look up their name really quickly because I keep saying this author and I literally read the whole book. I read it a few months ago, to be fair. Laziness does not exist by Devin Price. Um, and I believe they are a queer individual. So I'm sorry if I, got the pronouns wrong. Uh, I know that somebody else read the book, and, yeah, I wasn't too sure. But thank you for listening. Um, yeah, this is, I think it's I again, um, my rating overall wasn't very high, but I genuinely did walk away from this book with more compassion and understanding for, myself and for other people. So, yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.